We're also seeing more partisanship in certain elements, because if you have a small news organization and you want to create an affinity with an audience, certainly we see this in primetime cable, building your audience loyalty around your perspective on the news becomes, is a tried and true way of establishing a loyal audience. All of these things combined, I think, are creating the sense for people that the news is more of an argument and less of an authoritative finished product. And certainly, after some years of stability, for about 4 or 5 years, we saw no real movement in trust levels relating to the media. Just in the last couple of years, we've seen a rise in distrust again. And much of it, actually, is from liberals who think that the press has become more biased than they were. Earlier levels of distrust rising a decade ago tended to be more among conservatives. Now both sides are angry at us. Another critical issue, and this is a little bit subtle, is what you might call the unbundling of news. The old economic equation that created the news was that you take money from car ads and real estate ads, and you'd use that money to go cover zoning commissions or whatever editors thought was important. There was no connection between a given piece of content and revenue. You didn't sell specific stories or specific topics. There was essentially a shifting of resources. You take resources from one thing in a society, and you'd use it to cover whatever you thought was important. Now, increasingly, and that was built around the idea of a news organization's brand being important, that the news operation was sort of the sum of its parts, and that the popular stories helped build the audience that subsidized the unpopular stories, the stories that were significant. Now, increasingly, people are seeking out the news story by story, and that the news organization as a brand is somewhat less important, and the brand of an individual story, even an individual reporter, is somewhat more important. So a growing question, particularly with new metrics, if each story justifies itself with its own popularity, which we know very quickly as news people, what's the incentive for us to go out and cover news that is simply important but is never going to generate much of an audience? The civic news about each community that may, by the fact that those communities are small, not really generate a lot of audience. This is an increasingly significant issue that news people are going to have to grapple with. One of the other conclusions we come to in the report is that after all is said and done, and after a decade of carping between the dreaded MSM and their old stinky values about verification and objectivity, and the new media, which got it and understood the technology and wanted to open the gates, we think that the fortunes of this new media and the old media are going to be much more tied together than they ever anticipated. And the reason is, unless they can find a revenue model online to monetize news in a digital space, they're both going to have very limited repertorial capacity. So ultimately, they're going to become business partners in the search for new revenue models, and they're more stuck together than they ever thought they were going to be. We're also going to see, and we're already beginning to see, the idea of pro-am collaborations. How can news organizations use non-news people to help them gather the news? How can they have formal collaborations? How can they help each other? Are there economies of scale? Oh my God, we're back to synergy again between new and old media.